Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hi, Mike. Hi, Jay. How are you guys?
Good morning, Mark.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mark.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's good morning for us, Mike, because I think you're on the West Coast. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Whereabouts are you located?
San Jose, California.
Nice. In the epicenter of all Silicon Valley and all that stuff, right? It's a good place to be if you're in technology.
It is. And
Awesome.
The weather's great too.
Yeah. You do have that. Seattle, I'm in Seattle, and it's very much hit or miss. We had what they call a atmospheric river, which basically the sky opens up. And I think in California, you had one of those a year or so ago as well that went on for almost like a month.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Not a lot of fun. Jay, whereabouts you located?
I'm in the center of the universe. I'm in Buschhoven, Germany, which is just outside of Bonn. And the Romans built their aqueduct to Cologne right through this village. So there's actually pieces
that
of
was
it.
Just like in 1970 or no?
Exactly.
When was that?
that was around the year 30, actually.
30, that's amazing. 2,000 years ago. Wow. Well, hey, gentlemen, I first off, I want to thank you so much for coming on the memoQ Talks podcast. You guys are very deep subject matter experts in machine translation. I think you've both been presidents or current presidents of the American Association of Machine Translation? Did I get that correct?
Close enough. Association for Machine Translation in the Americas.
Thank you. So, Mr. Presidents, I want to talk to you. Maybe we can start at a higher level and talk about, AI and LLMs in general and where we're going. And then I would like to talk to you about the applications of those technologies in the context of the localization industry. And then maybe we'll just see where the conversation goes. But to kind of kick things off, I'm kind of curious because people talk about artificial intelligence and I believe it, general intelligence. Here's a question: do LLMs they actually think? And I'll just kick it over to. We can start with Mike, and then Jay, you can weigh in as well. Mike,
The quick answer to that is no.
Okay.
They imitate very well, but we don't have any evidence that there are any concepts involved or any kind of manipulation of concepts, which is the way psychologists and cognitive scientists think of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So there's none of that going on for LLMs. What's your usual response to that, Jay?
So my usual response is, I love how you use the word that's the way cognitive psychologists think about thinking, because we don't really understand what thinking is yet in people. Usually the question I get here is, do they really understand? And that's where I say, well, until we understand what it means that I understand, we can't even ask the question. It's kind of a red herring of a question, because it's what's important, just like you're talking to us and you think that we're both human beings sitting here because we're responding the way you expect a human being to respond. And that's how we test things with people. We ask them a question and we look for the response to be what we expect it to be. And that's as far as I'm willing to go with AI. If it's giving you the response that you're expecting or that you're looking for, then it's as good enough. It's acting the way we want it to act. And so whether it's thinking, whether it's understanding is a fascinating question, but I don't think it's one we can even really answer, to tell you the truth.
My main topic when I was in grad school was exactly how do humans understand? Okay. And what we know about the way humans understand, even though you're right, it's not complete. That's all very different from what LLMs do. So in practical terms, I agree with you that it looks like it's useful the way it is, but there's really nothing similar to thinking going on yet.
And Mike, you'd said that they're good at imitating, and I'm maybe just kind of push back on that a little bit. When you imitate, you can imitate from the internal mechanism. So, and that would be using the same kind of processes that humans use to think and solve problems. Or you could imitate in terms of just giving you the external output, and you would get something similar. So I think that's what you're saying.
Yep, that's a great way to phrase it. So the internal mechanisms are extremely wildly different, but the resulting behaviors are similar. The example I like to use is if you have a wind-up duck, it's painted to look like a duck, but you have to wind it up and you let it go, and it looks like a duck and it waddles like a duck, but it's not. It doesn't lay eggs, and hawks aren't interested in eating them and all sorts of things like that. So it's not really a duck.
Okay. So at this point, what is AI doing better than humans? Yeah, let's just drop it there.
Well, I'll jump in first here. I think as opposed to better, it's important to say faster, because nearly anything that an LLM can do, a human being, given enough time, would certainly be able to do better. And so, however, so the Turing test, this idea that if a human being can tell the difference between the output of a computer and the output of a human being through a simple set of, again, going back to what I said earlier, seeing that you're getting the expected output, then the Turing test isn't really valid anymore, because an LLM can do things much, much faster than a person could. So the idea with the Turing test is that if I can tell it's a computer, then it fails the Turing test. However, if you go out to ChatGPT, and this is something that I did right when it came out, and said, write me a Shakespearean sonnet about post-editing, it takes it about 5 seconds. And it would take a person probably 5 hours. And so the fact that it comes back in 5 seconds, even if they're roughly equivalent, the fact that it comes back so much faster, you already know it's the computer in that case. So in theory, it fails the Turing test because you know it's a computer as opposed to a person. So I think it's important to take the idea simply that it does things faster and it can read things and much, much faster. So using an LLM to summarize a long article, or to do any number of things that would take a person a long time to read, a computer can do it much, much faster. Can it do it better? Not if the person's given enough time to do it.
And that also is going to depend on the task. What does better mean? Which changes very much.
Well, and I would like to get into the specific task, but first off, I can imagine that the bard Bill Shakespeare is turning over in his grave because he's got people writing sonnets about post editing, which I'm sure he never really gave much thought to. But if you say that, and I said AI, I didn't say LLM, so there is a subtle difference, of course. If it's always just that the LLMs or AI is faster, what about in the case of autonomous vehicles? Because it takes a long time and a lot of power to train an autonomous vehicle. But the reason that there's so much work in that direction is that when they do achieve or reach a certain level of competence, they'll be better drivers than humans. Most automobile accidents and plane accidents are caused by human error. So how do you reconcile that? Faster versus better.
I don't think it requires any reconciliation. So language is more complicated than driving a car. I really very much look forward to the day. I'm sitting here in Germany where there's no speed limit and there are lots of traffic deaths, and I'm looking forward to a day when trucks can just drive slowly but automatically 24 hours a day to get to where they need to be, perfectly safely without risking anybody's lives and things like that. But I think so. I would really separate out the mechanical things from for this conversation from the linguistic things, because while the underlying technologies are similar in terms of what's being learned, if we're going to be talking about quality and how to measure quality and things like that, then language is a much kind of a richer place to talk, because it's easy to measure the quality of a self-driving car. Right.
Okay. So my original question is what does AI do better? And I wonder if there's some specific tasks. And you explained that generally it's not better, it's faster. And now I'm understanding that you're talking in the context of language related tasks. So for example, translation, or maybe even doing something where you're doing AI derived quality assessments on machine translation outputs, instead of having a human go through and check everything. Maybe there's a way that AI can go through and flag different sections and say, hey, maybe you want to send this to post editing, maybe you don't. I mean, Mike, do you have you want to add anything to like what kind of specific tasks that AI is just like a no-brainer to use it?
That's a great phrase for it, because we think of AI a lot of times as brainless. I think Jay captured it. So what's going on there is quantitatively, AI does a lot faster than humans, but there are a lot of qualitative aspects that AI can't handle yet. Okay, so there are things like adjusting how appropriate is this text to this bunch of readers, for example, and AI can't do that very well. And how appropriate is this text, or, how inappropriate is a text? You remember things, the chatbots like Tay that went off the rails and spewed hate speech and all these kinds of things. That's because there's still not a clear and accurate mechanism for assessing the language that's produced to the audience that's receiving it. Right.
And so what has to happen in order for AI or LLMs to be able to close the gap in terms of, where humans currently have that advantage in relation to qualitative work? And, the goal is to have AI take on more and more of that, or maybe even support that. I want to be careful with the terminology here. What has to happen with the technology to get to that point?
So what I'm going to be talking about at memoQ Fest is one of the big gaps, which is knowledge. So AIs, LLMs in particular, really, we like to say, imitate the sequence of words that they find out in the wild, in the web. Okay, and there are no mechanisms yet, or very few mechanisms, for double checking that against reliable knowledge in a particular domain, for example. Right? So this is what we call hallucinations. And that's one of the biggest gaps that's gotten most attention. So that's one. The other one that I just mentioned was, a way of modeling what's necessary and appropriate for the speaker that the text is for. You generate an answer, but right now we can't manipulate very well the wording of the text to make it appropriate for a particular speaker. Okay. So those are two. I'm sure Jay has his list as well.
Well, so what I would add to that, Mike, is that given metadata, so given information about how people reacted to texts in the past, in theory, could be used to help a system learn to produce texts that prompt the person to behave in the way that the author wants them to behave. So if you think in terms of marketing texts, just like we used to do with email campaigns and going way back letter campaigns, you'd send out 10 different versions and you'd see what the buy rate was on the different versions. And then you would say, okay, that's the one we're going to use. You can do the same thing. Of course, well, you can certainly imagine training a system to do the same thing. Compare all of, use the sentences that best elicited a buy response or whatever the response is that you're looking for, and write the email that way. So those are things that
these are possible.
It's more a question of data than it is a question of the technology.
No, it's interesting. I could imagine a an organization, maybe even open source, that would create a proprietary data set that looks at sentiment analysis of different marketing campaigns, and it's done all the A/B testing on, and then it could package that and sell it to marketers, or chat GPT or organizations like that to as a kind of a way for it to learn to produce output that's more targeted and focused. So that's pretty cool. Any other like training mechanisms like that you're seeing? And let's kind of go now towards the localization industry. How can we make the different MT engines or GPT models more accurate and effective?
With what we have now, and Mike's going to be able to add on to this, but it's a question of having more and better and more specific training material, so that the system kind of gets a PhD in your kind of content. Okay, nice. With the famous definition of a PhD being somebody who knows more and more about less and less until they know absolutely everything
That's
about
us.
nothing at all.
That's us.
And so you have a system that is very highly trained, and that's called overfitting, right? So that's actually can be a bad thing when a system is so expecting a particular kind of input that it can't be broadly applied. So it is a balancing act, but clearly in the translation space, you see better output when you're able to train it for particular types of content. That's just a gimme. That's just easy.
Yeah, this is how we've been doing it for a long time, even before AI. So the difference between an MT system, whichever, even rules-based or statistical, but the difference between one that's pre-trained for a specific client and one that's just generic is huge, right? So Jay's making a really important point here.
Excellent. And I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I want to go back to the PhD and, the position that I'm promoting is that we want to do exactly what Jay is saying, but a more efficient mechanism for doing that is this thing called knowledge graphs, where we can train the system not only with text, but with facts about a particular domain, and and enable it to use the facts to aggregate and check the text. So whatever it produces or whatever it receives.
Could you talk a little bit about knowledge graphs and explain, in a little more detail what they are, how they have become more commonly used these days, and what the advantages are?
Sure. So a knowledge graph is, I like to say, it's a kind of fancy database of facts. So general facts that are not really tied to the way they're phrased. So the concepts and each of the concepts that are linked together, and each of the concepts can have multiple ways of expressing it. So essentially, that's it. It's a database of facts that are interconnected in a wide range of ways. So you get things like a biological taxonomy. A taxonomy is one kind of knowledge graph. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it says how dogs and mammals are related. Okay, and how beagles are related to dogs. Okay, so there's a lot going on there. Regardless of whether you use the word dog or mutt or cur or fleabag or whatever you use, it's still the same concept. Okay, so this is the whole idea here, is to step away from the idiosyncrasies of the words that we choose for each concept, so we can have this general thing that helps us guide what's going on. Okay, so guide how we process the input and also guide how we produce the output. So this is, in general, what knowledge graphs are like. And the advantage there is that in the LLM world, when we're doing things only based on text, there's no notion of what any of this text means. It's just, we know this word comes after this word, and this word comes after this word. okay, without really enough information for the computer to have some notion of what the words mean and why they fit together.
Okay. And like, how much more effective or are knowledge graphs when they're being used to train MT engines or LLMs than what we were using before? Are we seeing an order of magnitude of a 20% improvement? I know you're not going to give me a specific number, but if we could talk about a range. Yeah.
I don't have numbers for you, but there've been several surveys of the research, and the more interesting fact there is at whatever step in the development and deployment of your LLM, if you add in knowledge graphs to the mix, then it improves it. So that's for each and every step. So when you're training as input, you can use knowledge graphs to guide how the training happens. You can use them to guide how the training is evaluated, to judge progress during training. At each step of the way, there's pretty solid evidence that knowledge graphs have a really positive effect. So how much overall, I don't know. There are not very many studies that combine knowledge graphs and use them at every step, right? But there've been these little experiments where, if we try it here, what happens? Oh, it gets better. If we try it over here, what happens? It gets better. So we know that has a really important effect, but we don't know, how much overall to give you a number.
Okay.
So think of it as adding structure to this education that's going on with just this running text. So when a child is learning a language, they're just hearing blah 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 blah. And then at some point, as education gets more formal, more formalized information is added to the training. You can think of it that way a little bit.
Yeah, that's nice. Thanks, Jay.
Okay, and so it helps you interpret the blah 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 with a framework of interconnected concepts that are abstracted away from the way those concepts are expressed.
Excellent. Thank you for that,
Mike.
Yep.
Let me ask you, because as I mentioned earlier, you both have very impressive backgrounds in the localization industry and in this technology that we're discussing right now. Mike, I believe that you've been primarily on the enterprise side. You worked in a very senior, interesting position with LinkedIn, working with knowledge graphs there, and you've worked with other large enterprises. Jay, you've worked with some of the largest LSPs in the world, I believe, including SDL and Lionbridge. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering, are the conversations in those types of organizations, when it comes to this type of technology and the application of it, are they different, similar, or the same?
Well, that's a cool question.
Isn't it?
So I think what we should do is
Jay and I would have to huddle before we
we'd have to compare notes here.
Virtual huddle time. Go ahead.
Okay.
So at large LSPs, it's a question of efficiency, right? You're trying to translate as quickly as possible so that you can be as competitive as possible on pricing or as profitable as possible. So in fact, you can think of them as kind of being the Darth Vader of the translation world, in that what you're trying to do, and a lot of your listeners are going to hate this, is pay the translator.
A lot of the freelance translators will agree with you, but I have no opinion on any of that.
Well, they'll agree with it, but they'll hate the idea. So the idea is for a large LSP, which large LSPs generally don't have in-house translators. They farm out all of that work. And so the idea is to make that work as efficient as possible so that you're able to sell those translations as competitively as possible. And so that's what it's about. It's about how much time does a translator have to spend on this text in order to post-edit it so that it's a perfect or a fit-to-purpose translation. So how much time is involved there, and what do I have to pay for that time? And so I know later on we might be touching on pricing a bit, and whether we're talking about the pricing of machine translation or the pricing of words from translators. Those are two very different topics. However, on the LSP side, it's about efficiency. That's all that it's about.
Thank you.
Interesting. On the enterprise side, I don't think it's so much about efficiency as it is about the effectiveness. So we want to add the team I put together. I stood up, built knowledge graphs to make the machine learning models at LinkedIn more accurate, essentially. And whatever application across the board for recommendations, for serving up ads, for search, whatever it was. So it wasn't as much making the process more efficient, but making the results more effective. Did we get more views of the ads? Did we get more clicks on recommendations? That sort of thing. So it is a bit different.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I, having worked on the LSP side, always coached my teams that when you go out in a sales meeting, that you should talk about those type of objectives, Mike, of what the customer is actually looking to achieve, because they may call it translation, but if you dig a little deeper and you find out that the content is for their website and they really just want clicks and reservations, then you have to optimize that text for that, which goes back to the conversation we had maybe 10 minutes ago about doing the A/B testing for different types of marketing text and so on and so forth.
Right.
It's probably a little bit more sophisticated than that, but that's the whole point, is when you're out there, don't just sell words. Try to get to an understanding of what they're trying to achieve, because the enterprises do want to achieve that. That's what their objective is.
Exactly.
They call it translation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Let me read a quote here. I think this was from Jay. It said, Jay Marciano points out, quote, "The day-to-day work of the translator of today will be hardly recognizable to a language services professional in 2030. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that, Jay.
So
I'll hold you to that one, Jay. Okay. We'll check back in with you in 2030.
We're good. I'll be on a beach, but yeah, let's do that. So what I mean by that is translators will be doing less and less translation and more stuff along the lines of what Mike is talking about organizing information so that these systems can translate better and better. And so somebody with fluency in multiple languages, with subject area expertise, can either continue to work away as a translator and try themselves, whether they're working independently or as an in-house translator, to get more and more efficient in order to earn more money. Or they can try to embrace the technology and do some of these other tasks around data curation, around machine learning experts, around any number of things that are designed to improve these systems. I think that's what I meant by that. That somebody with everyone's job will be affected. Every knowledge worker's job will be affected by AI as we move forward, without a doubt. I just see no question there. And so the question is, how do you swim along with that current as opposed to against it? And I think the way to do that is to understand that the vast majority of translation that's done today is automated translation. It's not even close. So something from 2012, I believe it was, Google said that on a single day they were doing about 100 billion words of translation, which is what the entire industry of professional translators does in a year. And they were doing that every day, and it's only increased since then. So the vast majority of translation on a per word or per character basis is done by computers right now anyway. And now that's going to raise people's ire right there, because the question is, what are you using these translators these translations for? Did you require a high quality translation or not? Are you gisting? Are you sending information out into the world that reflects my brand, or am I taking information in where there's levels of quality that I just don't care about? Right. So if I'm disseminating information, I care about the style of it. And the vast majority of these translations that are done with any number of the online translation tools are the opposite. It's where you're taking information in. Okay. And so where you don't really care about the quality. So these are things that generally would not have been translated before, but in our internet world, all of that content is available. It's available in digital format. You can cut and paste it. You can put in a URL into these translation engines and get a translation. So a lot of that work, technology is not going to get worse in terms of the quality of the output. And so assuming it's going to get better, the question becomes, where do you want to be as somebody in the language services industry, and what you want to be doing? And those people will be doing less translation. That's what I mean by that statement. And so if you're now spending 80% of your time translating and 20% of your time finding work to spend on your 80% of the time, then that 80% of the time you're going to be doing different stuff with that, along the lines of helping these systems get better.
Yep. I want to come back to that in a second. First, I'll make a comment, though, and then I'm going to kick it over to Mike to add on to what Jay just said there. But it's interesting because you talked about how MT is being used primarily, or to a large extent, for inbound information. And you gave a kind of, I would call a B2C example, where somebody's on a website and they want something translated, or they take a URL. I've actually seen, and I'm sure you guys have seen things like this, but at the enterprise level, globally, one of the world's largest consumer brands for fast-moving consumer goods, they're in 100 countries, and they get product complaints daily. And they don't have they need to get these translated immediately and sent to their compliance and legal team to figure out which of these are potentially critical. And oh, by the way, we've got 10 of them from this one market. We're related to this one product. Now we get the humans in to do a deep dive, but it's kind of I would call it like an advanced alert system. And it would be impossible or prohibitively expensive to have all of that go through human translation in the time that's needed. So, I mean, I don't think, I would hope that traditional translators wouldn't get their feelings hurt when they see that type of application of machine translation being used, because it's just that content couldn't be translated at scale using the traditional methods. But I digress. Mike, please comment on what Jay was discussing.
Sure. You're not digressing. This is really important. Jay and I are, as usual, fully aligned on this. Things are changing quite a bit. One of the things I think we need to focus on is that language professionals, in particular translators, have a wide range of skills. It's not just changing sentences into sentences. Okay, if you just think of the localization project managers out there who can juggle 650 things at the same time, this is a huge skill that nobody else has, basically. So one of the things that I think Jay might be saying is that we're headed towards more specialization. So instead of marketing yourself as a translator, you want to be more specific than that. You want to say, okay, I'm a specialist in chemical patents. We know someone like that. Or I'm a specialist in these really hard, impossible processes. Okay, this is what I know how to do in the language domain. So there are actually, hidden behind the term translator, there are a wide range of what I would call personas, expertise in a whole bunch of different things. Some people are really proud of the fact that they can generate lots of quite good translations in a small amount of time. Okay, that's one of the personas, or one of the personalities of the translator. But there are a whole bunch of them there. And what I think Jay is saying is that we're moving towards a place where we're going to bring to the fore or emphasize these other skills as well as language skills.
I think that's, from both of you, really important comments, feedback. And if I were going through a program to learn how to become a language industry professional, whether you call me a translator, project manager, whatever, I would kind of want my school or program to be out on front on this and teaching us the tools and the paradigms. And I want to come back to the paradigms first, because I think it was Jay that wrote something, learning from intelligent systems that learn from us. And I want to kind of drill down on that a little bit later. Like, how can we use these systems to accelerate our learning? But I think that's really important. Let me ask you, though, before we jump to that, and pricing models, we got to get to pricing models. When it comes to human in the loop, I'm wondering if there might be some kind of ethical dilemma there that, if I am an editor of a human translator, that the person that's going to learn from that is an individual. They might agree with my revisions. They might disagree. They might take something away from that. But if I'm post-editing on machine translation, and that machine is learning from my efforts, and that becomes part of that machine's IP, but that's me. So I'm getting paid to edit, but am I really getting compensated to help train that machine, which ultimately could take work away from me and my friends? So have you come across this conversation before, or am I just out? And what are your thoughts?
How many times, Jay?
Yeah, exactly. There's not been a week in my life for the last 25, 26 years that I haven't had this kind of a question. So, it's the, am I shooting myself in the foot question, basically, right? So if I'm post-editing, am I helping the system get better? In fact, the way the world is now, anything that's translated, that's made publicly available, will be scraped and will be used for these systems. Okay, so even if you're not doing post-editing, but you're translating, then that will end up as training material at some point, right? And so then an interesting question, there's certainly the ethical side of this. There's also the legal side of it. And one thing I've heard translators say, hey, that's my translation. And first of all, they say, I put in the same sentence into whatever MT system, and I got out the same translation that I produced. That's my translation. This is not translation memory. That's not actually what's going on. And the fact is, two different translators can in fact translate the same sentence in the same way, right? But the important point here is that when a translator is working for a customer, the customer owns the translation. The translator doesn't. Okay, so legally speaking, it's not the translator's IP, right? It's whoever they're working for. In contracts, if you read your translation contracts carefully, the stuff that you're producing belongs to your customer,
to the client. Okay. They paid for it,
right? So that the person who paid for it. So that particular argument, I don't think is legally valid. The ethical question is in a lot of ways more interesting. But here, and Mike and I were talking about this last week, I've used in the past the story of John Henry and dying in a competition with a steam shovel. So John Henry using his pickaxe to dig a tunnel, and a guy with a steam shovel beating him, and John Henry winning and then dying. And my point is, don't be John Henry. Be the guy using the steam shovel. So leverage technology. That's what you want to be doing. And so whether you consider it shooting yourself in the foot or making yourself a more valuable language professional for these future opportunities, I think that's a different way to think about it. it is a difficult question, and I certainly understand you can come down on the other side of that fence and decide that you're not going to take part in it. But these large language models and MT more specifically is going to continue to get better, right? So Mike and I have been involved. I think we're probably on our fourth wave of MT paradigms, going from rules-based to statistical to neural. And now, although it is basically neural, but talking about using LLMs to do MT, we're in our fourth paradigm of machine translation. And each one has gotten better. And whether the next one is quantum MT, whatever it's going to be, it's going to be better than where we are now. And so fighting it, I think you're looking at two people who have basically built careers, and by the looks of us, long careers on
Speak for yourself, Jay, even though you are younger than I am.
On working on these technologies. We're both, well, I'll speak for myself. I'm primarily a language person.
Me too.
And my first love is language. And so, but I've put together this career by working with the technology and not against it.
Got you.
So going back to Jay's point here is one of the things we were discussed the last wave or the wave before that, when the tools were starting to become available to translators, is to use the MT system yourself, because you can build a local MT system and you can improve your local MT system so that improves your IP, because in fact, all you have to deliver is the outputs. So there's a way around transferring your IP directly. There are several ways, but that's just one. And we've talked in the past that, different translator venues. Jay and I have been talking with translators for how long now? Since I just remembered ATA in Denver, and that was like 15 years ago.
That was 2010. Yeah, it was 2010.
Yeah, that was 2010. So we've been trying to build this bridge. Jay and I and a handful of other people have been building this bridge. You can look at MT as a thief or as a tool.
And I think those are very healthy perspectives if you are in the language industry and want to maintain your competitiveness or relevance in the industry. But there's this concept for that whatever tool humans adopt, we grow correspondingly stronger using that tool, or better or more effective using the tool, but we also grow correspondingly weak at actually doing that thing without the tool. So if we look at the calculator and arithmetic, or basic arithmetic, for example, if you look at the steam shovel,
but it frees up, it frees up bandwidth to develop other skills and emphasize other skills.
That is an argument, but if we look at the steam shovel, for example, if you're using that, you maybe can become more dexterous with your hands, but your upper back strength and lower back is probably not going to be as strong. Okay, that's the general argument. So whatever tool you use, generally, now the other argument is you'll free up time. But let me ask you, if everybody's using tools, and here's a concern, and I'm not talking about at the industry level, I'm talking about the societal level. If we're all using tools like Grammarly, okay? At some point, I kind of outsource my sentence creation to Grammarly. And it happens to me every day where Grammarly gives me a recommendation. And if I happen to be particularly tired or fatigued or in a hurry, I will just use the recommendation. And oftentimes it's not the way I actually wanted to word the sentence, but I'm like second guessing myself. Well, it must know better than me, and I'm tired and I'm not going to think about it. I just want to move on. But after a while, then Grammarly starts to, at a societal level, starts to train what is norms versus us as human beings. My teenagers communicate in a different way. They have different slang. They have everything like that. But all of a sudden, we have this, what's the word, white labeled English that's going to be used in emails.
Exactly.
And everybody's using the same expression. And I don't have the tool to think for that's not a word. I have outsourced and start using that tool, so my skill becomes weaker as time goes on, and I just start to follow it. And you get this, I want to call it a virtuous cycle, but you definitely get a cycle and compounding. What are your thoughts to that? if any.
So this is
Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, let me try to phrase this. What's going on here, and it's a really relevant example because in the math behind LLMs and generative AI machine translation, there's a step in there that says, give me the most likely continuation of this sentence. So what it's giving us is the most common, the most routine translation. And the same thing for for monolingual content. So give me the most routine or common or frequent version of this sentence that you can find in your training data. But there are a lot of use cases where that's not useful. If you're doing a translation of literature, if you're doing marketing content, if you have to convey the brand of something, then the most routine translation or content will backfire. Right? I had a really great experience when I was leading the machine translation team at eBay, and one of the enthusiastic engineers said, "Hey, I found us a really big corpus that we can use," and they were transcribed movies. Okay, which is great. And what happens? Well, every third sentence had some very offensive term stuck in the middle of it.
I was going to say an F-bomb, but yeah.
Okay. F-bombs, carpet bombing with F-bombs. And we just said, it was horrible. But in that corpus, it happened to be, the most frequent way of formulating and translating things. Right?
Makes a lot of sense.
That's great for what I call low impact and high volume translations, which is, there's a lot of that. Okay. But we also have high impact and low volume translations. If you're going to teach someone, if you're going to describe emergency procedures, then that's high impact. Okay. If you're working on a contract or you're trying to get across a brand, then that's high impact. And the most frequent translation or phrasing is just not going to work.
Totally makes sense. Jay, did you want to jump in?
So yeah, I was going to say what you were describing, Mark, is the difference between industry and art, right? So one is we're trying to do something as quickly as possible. Don't really care how finely done it is. I just need it to do what I said it's going to do. And the other one, if you really need to hone even an email or a marketing message because you have a subtle requirement for that, then you need to take more time to do that. And then the Grammarly vanilla English might not do the trick for you. But the fact is, so the founder of Lionbridge used the phrase, the crapification of language. And I was once misinterpreted at Local where I mentioned that, and somebody thought I was talking about the translation quality. No, I'm talking about the source material. Okay. So that source material is done more and more poorly. And as that happens, the question there is, well, what is a good translation at this point? Because the age-old question that translators ask is, do you want me to translate what you wrote or what you think you wrote? Because what you wrote is garbage, right? What you wrote wasn't really a good, even English sentence. So when we're talking about these things, I think it's one thing that I've called the Marciano law of translation pricing. This is your segue into pricing. I'm trying to spoon feed it to you.
Okay.
Is that
thank you?
Is that customers are willing to pay some percentage of their creation cost for the translation. So the more they invested in the creation of something, the more important it is to them, and the more willing they'll be to pay more for its translation. The far end of this scale, the low end of the scale, is user-generated content, which a customer paid $0 to produce, pays something to house. Think of Amazon product reviews or something. There is value in translating it because more people can get an idea of what that product's like in Japanese, whatever the language is. But almost nobody is willing to pay significant amounts of money. Actually, maybe Mike, with your LinkedIn experience, you can add into this. But UGC, you generally don't find a lot of it is translated, but it's not a high monetary market at all. But then if you have the annual report of a big company, which they take weeks and weeks, if not months, to put together, and they have to make sure that it's translated with absolute fidelity to the original, then they're going to be willing to pay top dollar for that.
This is what I call the difference between high impact content and low impact content.
Yeah, and impact is in the mind of the customer.
Yeah.
Right, so
who may or may not be hallucinating.
So since you brought up pricing, let's keep going with that. And I remember a time where an LSP would go out and say, "Oh, well, if you want human translation, it's going to cost this, and if you want MT, it's going to cost this." And I always thought, like, why would you even tell them it's MT? Why not just give them the quality that they want and price it accordingly? Because for a variety of reasons, but now we've got into, there's all kinds of discussions related to what's the word, traditional or the industry standard word rates, hourly rates. Where are we going with the pricing of translation, human and or machine assisted or full blown MT?
Boy, you worded that in a big way. So let's drill down a little bit. First of all, you have to talk about which direction you're talking about. If you're talking about the pricing that a customer pays or what you're paying to the translator. So that's an important distinction to make right there. And if we're talking about the translator side of things, I have been arguing for a long, long time for translators to say to whoever their customer is, "You're paying me per hour, not per word." Yep. And to come up with an hourly rate that they think accurately reflects the value of their work.
To pay for the skills and not for the words.
Exactly. Right. You're paying me for what I've learned to get here to where I am and for this expertise that I have. And I'm going to work hard for you. I'm going to do it as fast as I can, but at the level of quality that even exceeds your expectations, basically. So that's what I encourage translators to do. On the selling side of it, unfortunately, we're in an industry that has been selling translations either per word or per page or per line for, about 9,000 years. Right? And so trying to get out of that model is a very difficult thing to do. And one thing that I really like is, and I'll use your word in there, is impact pricing. Mike, I haven't called it that before, but base it on the importance of the translation. And because that already talks about the quality that's required. And presumably it talks about how many sets of eyes are going to look at it and things like that. So that's the way I would approach that there.
Yeah, so one example of thinking about that is you might take Harry Potter and translate it with MT and you'll save $30,000, but then you'll lose 50 million in sales, right? There's a lot of impact.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I just have a couple more questions. Let me ask you, you guys seem to agree on a lot of almost everything. In fact, everything that we've talked about so far.
Yes.
What do you guys argue about?
We argue about
cocktail.
In the focus of technology and the localization industry.
Jay, when was the last time we got into an argument?
Well,
come on.
The funny
there must
thing
be
is
some
we haven't seen each other in person for 10 years. So
that's a hard question for me.
So I think we both have very practical viewpoints.
Okay.
And I don't think we have axes to grind on this stuff. So I think that when new information comes in, I think both of us are very willing to take that into account and to change our position. So in that way, I think we're both fairly scientifically minded about this stuff. I might tend to oversimplify things. And that's might be where something I remember Mike once said to me.
Jay, I would phrase it that you communicate better.
Although you just did that better than I did. So So I
There's
am
not going to be
very,
any argument here, man. You guys are just too nice.
No, we've been working together on this stuff for too long.
It's yeah.
And we've both, as Mike said earlier, we've both been really doing a lot of outreach to the translator community over the course of years. I would say that between Mike, me, Joost Zetsche, and a handful of other people have been trying to bring translators along with complete respect for the skill sets that they have, with the understanding that a lot of MT people are in fact language people. I was once, this was actually the last time Mike and I presented together was in 2012 in San Diego.
That long ago?
Yeah, when you and I did the intro to MT together.
That's right.
And at that time, the incoming president to the ATA gave a talk that said that we didn't understand translators. Translators are very highly educated people that have these very refined skills, and we're all looking at each other like, we know that, but I don't think this person knows that about us. because this person was looking at a room full of PhDs and people who speak 3, 4, 5 languages sometimes, and these are not bad people. These are people who are fascinated by language and technology. And as we become more and more a more and more technological society, we have to bring along more and more people along with us to use and take advantage of the technology and leave fewer and fewer people behind. And that's something where I think Mike and I, one reason why we seem to be in agreement is because that's at the basis of a lot of this communication that we do.
So, Mark, Jay's starting a new effort now. No translator left behind.
I'm not going to comment. So, last question. I read this article, and the subtext or the sub paragraph said something like learning from the intelligent systems that learn from us. And part of the point of the article was that, hey, we can use these systems, and I'm not talking about in the context of localization. I'm just talking in general in our lives. We can use these systems to accelerate our own learning, right? Can you give me some examples in your own lives of systems or tools that you use to, one, keep abreast of all the stuff that's happening inside and outside of our industry, and how do you kind of accelerate that learning?
So I have a simple example of that is I spent far too many years analyzing incorrect machine translation output. Mm-hmm. But sometimes the errors were simple and they made me think about the source and the target in different ways. And they helped me learn to see more of the details of the differences between the two languages and the kinds of things that can change.
So I was immediately reminded of a Winston Churchill quote. He was talking about architecture and said, "We create our buildings, and after that, they create us." And so, or words to that effect. That's not I'm sure I messed that up somehow. And I do believe that as we create these technologies, as you were saying, Mark, there are some skills like hand a map, a road map to somebody under the age of let's say 35, and have them try to get somewhere without a GPS. It's like they don't know how to unfold it.
Did you guys ever use the Thompson guides?
Yeah.
So how do we operate this thing? I don't know.
But I truly believe that what's required isn't necessarily to accelerate ourselves, but maybe even to slow down. And by that, I mean logical thinking, taking the time to really think, whatever thinking means, Mike.
Oh, here we go.
and that's something that's missing more and more, right? As we seem to be speeding up everything. But the fact is, a lot of stuff is taken for true because nobody takes the time to sit down and say that it's not true. And so something that I can't accelerate in myself is my ability to think through problems. So that's where one thing where I think it's important to slow down sometimes. And so that's in terms of professional development, I think people should try to become intelligent systems themselves. So we're OI, we're organic intelligence as opposed to AI, but keep on trying to improve that. So, and the way you improve that is the same way an AI would be improved. More data, more structured data that Mike's talking about, and taking the time to really try to internalize that and learn that, and being creative and being imaginative, things that we can argue whether computers can be imaginative or creative as well. But that's something where just trying to think of what kind of data to introduce to a machine learning program is an exercise in human creativity, because AI is in fact among the greatest human accomplishments. It's not an artificial accomplishment. We did it, right? And so being able to try to keep on pushing yourself along in those same ways, keep on reading more stuff, keep on processing, keep on structuring the knowledge that's in your head, and keep your goals in mind and try to get to them efficiently is the way to do it. And you have to decide where you want to be as we move forward with these technologies.
I think that's some great advice. And, you know, if you look at the pace of the world, there's so much FOMO, and everybody's like, I gotta read everything and do everything. And that ability to just set some time aside and do deep focused work is critical. I can't remember if it was the book Stolen Focus or it was Proust and the Squid, but both of them talked about, you know, the challenge of focusing, and Proust and the Squid goes into the importance of deep reading. One of the two authors made this, it was a beautiful worded paragraph talking about, I used to be a scuba diver in a sea of words, going under and staying there and seeing all kinds of beautiful patterns, things like that. But now I feel like I'm on a jet ski skimming across the surface and not noticing anything, something along those lines. And it was a really nicely worded analogy. And I think that a lot of us, a lot of the world is more on the jet ski these days than doing the deep dive. And so to your point, I think it's incredibly important. Speaking of which, I mean, that's why we do these memoQ talks is we would like to talk to people like yourselves and do a sort of quote unquote deep dive on a particular topic. To that end, I really want to thank you both for coming on memoQ Talks, sharing your opinions. I'm sure we could carry on this for hours. Also, thank you for coming to the memoQ Fest. I'm not sure if this will be published before or after, but thank you in advance or after the fact.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a lot of fun.
See you later,
Cheers,
Jay.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.